The rope bit into Sira's wrists the moment her father tied the second knot. She did not look at him. She had stopped looking at him a long time ago. Around the same year she stopped expecting things from people who had already decided what she was worth. She looked at the ground instead. Brown dirt, dead grass, a beetle moving between her feet with more purpose than anyone had shown her in years. The harvest claiming happened every autumn in the Greystone pack. It had happened every autumn for as long as any elder could remember, and no one had ever thought to question it, because questioning old things in a pack like Greystone was the same as asking to be the next one standing in the dirt with rope on your wrists. Women who had not produced children stood in a line at the eastern edge of the gathering field. That was the rule, that was what happened. The pack elder, a heavy-set man named Corbin who smelled like pipe smoke and bad decisions, would call the names one at a time, and the men of the pack would decide, and numbers would be spoken, and the matter would be settled. Sira had known for 2 years that her name would be on the list. She had been mated at 18. His name was Denton, and he was not a cruel man, which she supposed was the most generous thing anyone could say about him. He was simply a man who had wanted children and had not gotten them, and after 3 years of waiting and 2 years of quiet blame, he had requested a formal dissolution from the pack elder and gone to find himself a woman whose body worked the way he needed it to. The dissolution was granted on a Tuesday. Sira's father found out on a Wednesday. By Thursday he had already begun calculating. She understood this the way she understood weather. You did not feel angry at rain for being wet. You simply looked for higher ground. The problem was that in Greystone, there was no higher ground for a woman who had been returned. So she stood in the line, 8 women, she was the 5th. She counted the knots in her rope again, 7. She did not know why her father always tied 7. She suspected he did not know either. Some people filled the gaps in themselves with ritual, and her father was very full of gaps. Corbin stood at the front of the field with his ledger book and his pipe, and his voice that carried like something thrown from a high window. "Harvest claiming is open," he said. "We begin with Marna." Sira watched from the corner of her eye as Marna, who was 26 and had warm brown hair and a laugh that could fill a room, was bid on and claimed within 4 exchanges. Marna would go to the Miller household on the north side, where she would have a warm bed and work she could bear, and in a year she would probably produce what Denton had wanted from Sira, and everyone would call it a blessing. Sira counted the beetle's legs, 6. It moved with a confidence she admired. The line moved, 3 more women, 1 was claimed fast, 1 took longer. 1, a quiet girl named Petra who was barely 20 and had lost her child at 4 months, wept silently the entire time and no one comforted her because comfort was not part of the ceremony. "Sira of the Aldrin house," Corbin said. She stepped forward. She had decided, somewhere between Wednesday and Thursday of the week, her father began calculating that she would not look at the ground while her name was being called. She would look at the horizon, not because there was anything there worth seeing, but because looking at the horizon meant she was not looking at them, and not looking at them was the only form of pride she had left, and she intended to keep it. The horizon was gray and flat, and completely indifferent to her situation. Corbin read from his ledger. He listed her age, which was 24, her previous bond status, which was dissolved, her household skills, which were listed as cooking, mending, and general labor. He did not list her as barren directly. The pack had a word for it. They said without fruit, as though she were a tree that had simply chosen not to bloom. Then he said, "Opening bid for Sira Aldrin." Silence. Not the short silence of people considering. The long silence of people who had already considered and decided, and were now simply waiting for Corbin to move on. Her father stood at the edge of the crowd. She could see him from the corner of her eye, even though she was looking at the horizon. He shifted his weight, he cleared his throat, he did not bid. Of course he did not bid. You did not bid on something you were trying to sell. Corbin repeated the opening, still nothing. He lowered the bid, still nothing. He lowered it again, and a man near the back, she did not know him, which meant he was from one of the outer settlements, raised 2 fingers, and Corbin wrote something in the ledger, and that was that. She had been sold for less than the price of a good winter coat. The man who had bought her was not buying her for his household. He was a supply coordinator for the eastern border outpost, a cold and windswept camp 2 days' ride from the nearest real town, and what he needed was labor, hands. Someone to carry wood and wash linen, and prepare food for the rotating soldiers who cycled through. He explained this to her while untying her rope, not unkindly, in the tone of a man who had done a practical thing and wanted it to be understood as a practical thing. "You will have your own room," he said, "small but yours." She nodded. "The work is not difficult, steady, the soldiers are not trouble." She nodded again. "Do you have questions?" "When do we leave?" she said. He blinked. He had expected tears, probably, or silence, or the look that Petra had worn. He got a woman looking at him with eyes the color of still water asking a logistical question. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Then I need to collect my things tonight." She went back to her father's house one final time. He was not there. She had not expected him to be. She moved through the 3 rooms of the house she had grown up in, the kitchen that smelled like old wood, the main room with its worn rug and 2 chairs, the small side room where she had slept as a child, and she collected what was hers. A wool blanket, 2 changes of clothes, a small tin cup she had bought herself at the market 3 years ago, the only thing she owned that she had chosen entirely for herself, a knife with a bone handle, her mother's shawl, gray and worn thin at the elbows, which her father had not thrown away only because he had forgotten it existed. She wrapped everything in the blanket and tied it in a bundle and walked out of the house without closing the door behind her, because the door was not hers, and she did not owe it a goodbye. She slept that night at the edge of the camp in a wagon bed under her wool blanket, and she did not cry, and the beetle from the gathering field, or one very much like it, walked across her boot at some point in the night, and she watched it go with something that was almost warmth. The ride to the eastern outpost took 2 full days and part of a 3rd morning. The supply coordinator, his name was Aldrich, which she learned on the first day, was a man of few words and many lists which she respected. He kept his lists in a worn leather notebook and consulted it often. She did not ask what was on the lists. She suspected they were very practical lists about very practical things, and that her name had recently been added somewhere near the bottom. The land changed as they rode east. The settled hills of Greystone territory gave way to wider, flatter ground. The trees thinned. The sky got bigger. Sira sat in the back of the supply wagon and watched the sky get bigger and felt something in her chest ease slightly, the way a knot eases when you stop pulling against it and simply let the rope go slack. The outpost appeared on the morning of the 3rd day. It was smaller than she had imagined. 6 buildings inside a low wooden wall, a stable, a fire pit, a well. Perhaps 30 people moving around inside it, soldiers mostly, young men and a few older ones with the careful eyes of people who had seen things they did not talk about. Aldrich showed her the room. He had not been lying about its size. It was barely large enough to turn around in. A cot, a small shelf, a hook on the wall for clothes, a window the size of a book that looked out over the eastern tree line. She put her wool blanket on the cot. She hung her mother's shawl on the hook. She set her tin cup on the shelf. She looked at the room. It was the smallest space she had ever lived in. It was entirely hers. She reported for work the next morning before anyone else was awake, because old habits do not disappear just because the walls change, and one of her oldest habits was being the first person up. She found the cooking fire, the supply of dry wood, the stores of grain and salt and dried meat, and by the time the first soldier appeared in the doorway of the cooking building, she had water boiling and flatbread on the iron pan. The soldier stared at her. "Who are you?" he said. "Sira," she said. "Sit down, food is almost ready." He sat down. People usually did when she said things in that particular tone. It was not a hard tone or a rude one. It was simply a tone that assumed compliance so completely that arguing with it felt like arguing with gravity. More soldiers came. She fed them. They were, as Aldrich had promised, not trouble. They were tired men doing a dull job in a cold place, and what they wanted was hot food and to be left alone with it, which was exactly what she provided. The work settled into a rhythm within a week. Food, water, linen, fire. The soldiers rotated in and out on 2-week cycles. She remained constant. They began to nod at her in the mornings with the specific nod of people who are not quite friends but are not strangers either, the nod of people who share a fire. She did not think about her father. She thought about him the way you think about whether you have already survived. It happened. It is over. The sky is different now. She did not think about Denton either. Or she did sometimes at night, not with grief but with a kind of flat curiosity, the way you might wonder about a road you once took that led nowhere interesting. What she thought about, more often than she expected, was the tree line. The eastern tree line was the edge of wild territory. No pack claimed it. The soldiers watched it because things moved through wild territory that were not always friendly, and the border outpost existed because someone, at some point, had decided that someone needed to be watching. She watched it too, in the early mornings and the late evenings when the light turned everything the color of old copper. She could not have said what she was looking for. Maybe she was not looking for anything. Maybe she simply liked looking at a place where the rules were different. It was on one of those evenings, 6 weeks into her time at the outpost, that she saw him. She was carrying a bucket of water from the well to the cooking building when she noticed something at the edge of the tree line. A shape, too large to be a deer, moving wrong, not the smooth movement of an animal that belonged there, but the broken, staggering movement of something that was trying very hard to keep moving and losing the argument. She set down the bucket. The shape moved 2 more steps out of the trees and collapsed. She crossed the open ground to the tree line in the time it took her mind to run through the short list of things she was supposed to do in a situation like this, which was primarily to get a soldier, and then she arrived at the shape and looked down at it, and her mind stopped making the list. He was a man, large. She could see the markings on the left side of his throat, the pack markings of an eastern territory she did not recognize, which meant enemy markings, which meant she was now standing over an unconscious enemy wolf at the edge of the tree line in the last light of the evening with a bucket of water back by the well. He was also bleeding from a wound in his side that had clearly been there long enough to be deeply concerning, and his breathing was the shallow, too quick breathing of someone whose body was working harder than it should have to do something as basic as stay alive. She looked at him for a very long moment. Then she went and got the bucket of water, not a soldier, the bucket. She came back, she crouched beside him. She pressed her hand to the wound. She had learned basic wound care the way most women in Greystone learned it, because someone had to know, and usually it ended up being the women, and felt the depth of it and the heat of it, and understood that if she left him here he would be dead before morning. She thought about what he might represent, a scout, a spy. An advance for something larger coming through the trees. She also thought about the fact that he was breathing too fast, and his skin was the color of old wax. She made a decision, not a complicated one. She had never found that complexity added much to decisions that were, at their core, simple. The simple fact was that there was a living person in front of her, and she knew how to keep living people alive, and so she would. She went and got the youngest soldier she could find, a boy named Cole who was earnest and strong and not given to asking too many questions, and she told him she needed help carrying something. "What something?" he said. "A man," she said, "from the tree line come now." He came because she had said it in that tone. They carried the unconscious man into the outpost. She put him in the storage room, not because she was being unkind, but because it was the warmest room and the one farthest from the outer wall, and warmth mattered more than dignity when someone's blood had mostly decided to leave their body. Cole stared at the pack markings on the man's throat. "Sarah," he said very carefully, "those are enemy markings." "I know," she said. She was already cleaning the wound. You should go get me the medicines box from Aldrich's stores, and then you should not tell anyone about this until morning," she said. "Because if you tell anyone tonight there will be decisions made by people who are tired, and it will go badly. In the morning, with the light, it will go better." Cole considered this. "You're going to get me in a lot of trouble," he said. "Probably," she said. "Medicine box, go." He went. She worked through most of the night. The wound was deep but clean, a blade, not a claw, which meant something though she was not sure what. She cleaned it and packed it and wrapped it, and she sat beside the man and monitored his breathing and gave him water when he came close enough to consciousness to swallow it. And sometime around the 3rd hour of the night, he opened his eyes and looked at her with the expression of a man who had expected to wake up dead and was confused about the alternatives. "You are safe," she said, because it seemed like the most immediately useful thing. He blinked. His eyes were dark and very tired. "Where?" he started. "Eastern Border Outpost. I found you at the tree line. You were not going to last the night outside." He closed his eyes, then opened them again as though checking that she was still there. "I have a message," he said. His voice was barely a voice, more like the idea of a voice, for the Alpha King. She looked at him carefully. You are in no condition to deliver anything tonight, she said. It cannot wait. It will wait until morning, she said, because you are going to sleep now, and in the morning you will still be alive, which means the message will also still be alive. He looked at her for a moment with those dark, exhausted eyes. She looked back at him with her still-water eyes that had watched the horizon during the harvest claiming and had not broken. He slept. She sat beside him until she was certain his breathing had steadied into something that resembled safety. Then she got up, straightened her back, which ached from the crouching, and went to stand at the small window that looked over the yard. The night was very clear, cold enough to see her breath. The tree line was a dark edge against a darker sky, and somewhere beyond it, whatever this man had been running from was still out there. She did not know what his message said. She did not know who had hurt him. She did not know yet what chain of events her simple, practical decision to carry a stranger out of the cold was about to set in motion. The way a single stone dropped into still water does not know what size its circles will grow. She only knew that he was breathing. She wrapped her mother's shawl around her shoulders. She watched the tree line until the sky began to lighten. Morning came with frost on the ground and the smell of wood smoke, and the particular quality of cold light that makes everything look very real and very clear and slightly merciless. Sira had not slept. She had made peace with this somewhere around the 4th hour of the night, when she accepted that sleep was not going to happen and that this was fine, because there were things to do, and she had always done better with things to do than with things to wait for. She had already stoked the cooking fire and started the morning water when Aldrich appeared. He came through the cooking building door with his ledger under his arm and his pipe unlit in the corner of his mouth, which was how he always looked in the mornings before the day had given him reason to be either pleased or concerned. The day was about to give him reason. "There is a man in your storage room," Sira said before he could ask anything. She handed him a cup of hot water with dried herbs in it, which was what passed for tea at the border outpost, and she looked at him steadily. "He came out of the tree line last night badly hurt. I brought him in. He has enemy pack markings, but he carries a message for the Alpha King, and I believe he is a courier, not a soldier." Aldrich looked at the cup of tea, he looked at her, he put the ledger down on the table. "Show me," he said. They went to the storage room together. The man was awake, which was better than it might have been. He was sitting up against the wall, which was more than Sira had expected. He was still pale, and the wound would need another day at minimum before he could move any real distance. But the terrible shallow breathing of the night before had steadied into something that sounded like a man who intended to keep living. Aldrich looked at the pack markings for a long moment. His face did not change in any dramatic way, but Sira had been watching people's faces for long enough to read the very small changes. A slight tightening around the eyes, a particular stillness. "He's from Verk territory," Aldrich said. "Eastern deep woods, 6-day ride." "7 at my pace," the man on the floor said. His voice was stronger than it had been, not strong but stronger. "I was not moving at a good pace." Aldrich crouched down to his level. "You say you carry a message for the Alpha King." "Not carry," the man said. "I carry the information in here." He touched his temple. "They took the paper, that is why they were trying to prevent me from arriving." "Who is they?" The man looked at him with dark eyes that had clearly done this calculation before, the calculation of how much to trust, how much to give away, how much to hold back until there was confirmation of safety. Sira recognized that calculation. She had been running it her whole life. "My name is Owen," the man said. "I serve the Alpha King's Eastern Intelligence Network. I have been embedded in Verk territory for 14 months. What I found there cannot be delivered through normal channels because the normal channels have been compromised. I need to reach the capital." Aldrich was quiet for a moment, then he stood up. "I will need to send word to the capital," he said. "Yes," Owen said, "but not through the standard relay. The relay is what's compromised." Aldrich looked at Sira. Sira looked at Aldrich. "How do you know?" Aldrich said. "Because I sent a test message through the relay 8 weeks ago," Owen said. "I was intercepted 3 days later. The people doing the intercepting knew exactly what the test message said." The storage room was very quiet, frost on the small window, the sound of soldiers moving around outside, the ordinary sounds of a morning that did not yet know it had changed. I will think, Aldrich said. He picked up his ledger. He looked at Sira. Feed him, keep him warm. Tell no one else. Cole already knows, she said. Aldrich looked at the ceiling briefly. Of course Cole knows. He was useful, she said, and he is not given to talking. Aldrich left. Sira brought Owen food, flatbread and dried meat and a cup of the herb tea, and sat on the storage room floor beside him while he ate, because she had found that people ate better when someone sat with them, and because she wanted to ask him something. She waited until he had eaten half of it. The people who were trying to stop you, she said, are they going to come here? Owen stopped chewing. I do not know, he said honestly. That is the right answer, she said. Wrong answer would have been no, when you have no way of knowing that. He looked at her with a look she recognized, the look of someone recalibrating, adjusting the image they had formed of a person based on new information. You are not what I expected to find at a border outpost, he said. No one ever expects much at border outposts, she said. That is generally the point. She left him to rest and went back to the cooking fire and the daily work of keeping 30 soldiers fed and the outpost running, which was the same work it had been yesterday, except that yesterday there had not been an injured intelligence courier in the storage room with information that could apparently not travel through normal channels. She thought about this while she worked. She thought about it the way she thought about most things, methodically, from the edges inward, looking at what she knew and what she did not know, and what the space between those two things might contain. What she knew, Owen was badly hurt but stabilizing. He had information he needed to get to the Alpha King. The normal way of getting information to the Alpha King had been compromised. Aldrich was a careful man who would send word carefully. What she did not know, what the information was, whether the people who had been chasing Owen knew which direction he had gone, how long it would take Aldrich's carefully sent word to reach the capital and produce a response. What the space between those things contained, time, which was the one thing that kept not being on anyone's side. Aldrich sent his message that afternoon through a courier he trusted personally, a middle-aged woman named Hilda who had been riding between the outpost and the nearest town for 12 years, and who was, in Aldrich's estimation, the most discreet person within 100 miles. He wrote it in his private shorthand that only he and the capital's receiving officer knew, and he gave Hilda 3 different possible routes and told her to choose based on what she saw and to trust her instincts. Hilda rode out before sunset. Sira watched her go from the cooking building doorway. Cole appeared at her elbow. Do you think they will come? He said. She had been thinking about this since Owen had given her his honest answer. I think we should be ready in case they do, she said. She went to see Owen again that evening. He was stronger. He was trying to stand up, which she stopped firmly, and they had a brief argument about it in which she pointed out that a wound that opened from standing too soon would cost him 3 more days of recovery, and he pointed out that 3 days might be the difference between this information arriving in time and not arriving in time, and she pointed out that dead couriers delivered no information at all. He sat back down. You are very practical, he said. Yes, she said. Have you always been? She thought about this for a moment. I think I was practical by preference when I was young, she said. And then life gave me several reasons to be practical by necessity, and now it is both. He looked at her with his dark, tired eyes. Where are you from? Greystone Park. Something crossed his face. Long way east from Greystone. Yes, she said simply. He understood from the way she said it that there was more in that single word than she was going to hand him, and he was intelligent enough not to push. What will happen, she said, if the message does not reach the Alpha King? Owen was quiet for a long moment. The storage room was warm, she had made sure of that, and the light from the small lamp made everything look quieter than it was. There is a network, he said finally, built over 4 years, running through 3 packs, moving people. He paused. Moving women, mostly. The ones the packs decide they do not want anymore. Selling them outside the pack system, to places where there are no elders to ask questions and no ceremonies to at least pretend there are rules. The storage room was very still. The Alpha King does not know how large it is, Owen said. I do, that is what I am carrying in here. He touched his temple again. Names, routes, the people at the top of it. The pack elders who are taking payment to look the other way. Sira looked at him steadily. And if it does not get to him, she said. It continues, Owen said, as it has been continuing, and more women disappear into it. She sat with this for a moment. She sat with it the way she had sat with the gathering field and the rope and the horizon, not looking away from it, not dressing it up, just seeing it plainly. Then it needs to get to him, she said. Yes, Owen said. She stood up, she smoothed her skirt, she picked up the lamp. Sleep, she said, you will need all of it. She went to the window that looked out over the tree line. The night was darker than the night before, clouds had come in, the stars were gone. Something moved at the edge of the trees. She stood very still and watched. It was nothing, or it was a deer, or it was the wind in the long grass at the tree line's edge. She watched for a long time. Then she went and quietly woke Cole. Double the watch tonight, she said, don't explain why. Just do it. Cole looked at her face. He did not ask questions. He went. Sierra stood alone in the dark corridor of the small outpost, in a room barely large enough to turn around in, with her mother's shawl on her shoulders and her tin cup on the shelf, and nothing else that had ever been given to her freely, and she made a second decision that night without much drama. Whatever came out of those trees, she was going to be the one still standing when it was over. Not because she was brave. Bravery was about fear, and she had been afraid so many times in so many small ways that the large fears no longer landed the same way. Simply because there was a man in the storage room with information that needed to reach a king, and she was the one who knew it, and she had always been the one who did the necessary thing. She went to bed. She slept with the knife with the bone handle under her pillow. She slept very well. The attack, when it came not in the dark but in the gray hour just before dawn, which is the hour that attacks prefer because it is the hour when the human body most wants to believe it is still safe to sleep. Sierra was already awake. She had been awake since the third hour of the night, not from fear but from the same practical instinct that had made her double the watch. Her body had done the math on the situation, enemy wolves, compromised courier, unknown timeline, and concluded that sleeping through the critical window was a poor strategy. She heard Cole's shout from the eastern wall first. Then the sound of the outer gate, which was not a sound the outer gate was supposed to make at that hour. She was already out of bed and at the storage room door before the second shout. Owen was on his feet. The wound did not care, neither did he. They found me, he said. It was not a question. Move to the far corner, she said. Stay down. Whatever happens, you do not open that door unless it is me or Cole or Aldrich. I know how to stay out of the way of wolves, she said. Move. He moved. She was not wrong about knowing how to stay out of the way. She was also not entirely truthful about the direction she intended to move. She did not go to her room. She went to the supply building, and she got the nearest lantern and the oil stored for emergencies, and she climbed to the top of the supply building's roof access, which was a maintenance ladder on the inside that the soldiers used for checking for weather damage, and she came out on the flat section of the roof at the highest point of the outpost. Below her the yard was chaos. 6 or 7 shapes had come over the eastern wall. Not many, this was not an army, it was a retrieval party, which meant they had come for Owen specifically. Cole and 2 other soldiers were at the wall. Aldrich was shouting from somewhere near the stable. She lit the lantern. She climbed to the highest point of the roof. She waved the lantern in the pattern that the pack relay used for emergency signals, long, short, long aimed not at the east but at the south, toward the relay tower she had noticed on her first day at the outpost, 2 miles distant, that she had asked Cole about once out of curiosity, and that Cole had explained was connected to the next relay and the next one after that, all the way to the capital. Not the compromised relay. The physical fire relay, old system, older than the messenger network, older than most of the politics that had apparently poisoned the newer one. Long, short, long. She held the lantern high and kept the pattern steady while below her the sounds of the yard continued, and somewhere in the relay network a watcher saw a light and picked up their own lantern and passed it on, and then the next watcher, and then the next, all the way toward a capital that did not yet know that a border outpost had something it needed to hear. She stayed on the roof until the yard was quiet. The retrieval party retreated. She learned later from Cole that they had not expected organized resistance and had lost the element of surprise, and had made the practical calculation that a 6-person extraction team could not fight 30 soldiers and win. They had gone back over the wall and into the trees. Cole found her on the roof, still holding the lantern. "What are you doing up there?" he said. "Sending a message," she said. She climbed down. Her arms were shaking slightly from holding the lantern high for so long. She did not mention this. She went to the cooking fire and stoked it and started water for the morning, because 30 soldiers would be cold and hungry after a fight, and because the next thing that needed doing was always the next thing that needed doing. Owen was alive, the outpost was intact. And somewhere along a chain of fire signals moving through the dark, a message was traveling toward a king who did not yet know his name was about to become part of Sira Aldrin's story. She poured herself a cup of the herb tea. It was, she thought, a decent morning. The Alpha King of the Northern Pax was not a man who slept well, and he had not been a man who slept well for 3 years, which was how long it had been since the war. His name was Kaylan. In the capital, people used his name carefully, in the way they used sharp things carefully, aware of what it could do if handled without attention. They called him the Alpha King in formal settings, and he and him in informal settings, and in private conversations when they thought no one was listening, they called him the Quiet One, which was not a reference to his personality but to the particular silence that lived behind his eyes. The silence had moved in 3 years ago. Before that, by all accounts, and Kaylan had very little interest in hearing those accounts, he had been someone different. Someone who laughed at the right moments and spoke at council with heat rather than precision, and had a large and expressive relationship with the world. The war had restructured things. He was at his war table when the message from Aldrich arrived, not through the relay network, which would have been faster, through a personal courier, a woman named Hilda who had arrived in the capital sweating and plainly determined, and who had refused to give the message to anyone except the Alpha King directly, because Aldrich had told her to, and Hilda had been following Aldrich's directions for 12 years and saw no reason to stop. Kaylan read the message. He read it again. He handed it to his second, a man named Davin who had been his second since before the war, and who had therefore seen both versions of him and managed, through some combination of loyalty and personal stubbornness, to remain useful across both. Davin read it. His face, which was a face that had learned to keep its reactions inside rather than on display, gave away 2 things, a slight widening of the eyes and a controlled exhale through the nose. For Davin, this was the equivalent of another man's jaw dropping. "The Verk network," Kaylan said. "Yes," Davin said. "Owen found it." "Owen survived long enough to find it," Davin said, "which is more than we gave him 4 months ago." Kaylan set down the message. He looked at the war table, which had a map of all the Northern Pact territories marked with pins and lines, and the careful annotations of people who spent their lives thinking about positions and movements and the space between them. "How compromised is the relay?" he said. "If Owen's test holds significantly," Davin set the message down on the table, "the question is whether it is limited to the Eastern relay or whether it runs deeper." "We assume deeper until we know otherwise," Kaylan said. "Yes." He looked at the map. The eastern border outpost was a small mark on it, barely a dot, one of dozens of marks that represented dozens of places where people were doing quiet and necessary work in conditions that the capital preferred not to think about too directly. "Send a recovery team," he said. "Get Owen to the capital." "The outpost has been attacked once already," Davin said. "They will be watching the roads." "Then go around the roads." "It is 6 days in good conditions. Around the roads in the open country at this time of year." 7, Kaylan said. 8, however long it takes. He needs to reach the capital alive. Send good people." Davin nodded. He began to turn toward the door. "And Davin," Kaylan said. He stopped. "Find out who is running the outpost. Aldrich has a good head, but someone made the decision to signal the old fire relay. That is not a standard procedure. Someone thought of it specifically." Davin looked at him with the careful neutrality of a man who knew his Alpha King well enough to hear the things that were not being said directly. "I will ask," he said. He left. Kaylan stood at the war table alone. The capital moved around him. He could hear it through the thick walls of the war room, the sounds of a large settlement doing its daily work. kitchens and stables, and the particular rhythm of a place that has organized itself around function. 3 years ago, he had found those sounds comforting. Now they were simply sounds. He looked at the map for a long time. Then he moved a pin, a small red pin that represented the approximate location of something they had been trying to find for 2 years, from where it had been sitting in the deep eastern territory to a point slightly further west. Getting closer, he thought. Then he went back to the matter of the relay network, and the meeting with the council that Davin would schedule for the morning, and the careful chain of decisions that would need to be made and unmade and remade before Owen's information could be acted on safely. He did not think about the border outpost again. Yet, the recovery team that Davin sent was 4 wolves. Good ones, experienced, efficient, capable of moving quietly through difficult country. Their leader was a steady woman named Bria who had served in the eastern regions for 6 years, and knew the land the way you know land you have spent years navigating in all seasons and in difficult circumstances. They arrived at the border outpost 9 days after the fire signal had been sent. 9 days because the roads had been watched, as Davin had predicted, and Bria had gone around them as the Alpha King had directed, and the open country at this time of year was exactly as Davin had described, which was to say demanding. They arrived at dusk. Owen was on his feet, barely and not without visible effort, but on his feet. He had insisted on this. Sira had told him twice that it was a poor idea, and they had reached a compromise where he stood for approximately 1 hour a day and spent the rest of the time horizontal and being kept alive. Bria stood in the outpost yard and assessed the situation with the particular thoroughness of someone who had been sent to retrieve one person and was evaluating the chances of bringing that person back intact. "He can travel," she said. "In a wagon, yes," Sira said. "On horseback, not yet." Bria looked at her. "And you are?" "Sira," she said, "I run the cooking and the household operations here." Bria looked at Aldrich. Aldrich said she is also the reason Owen is alive, and the reason the signal reached the capital. Bria looked at Sira again. The reassessment was visible but brief. "Can you ride?" Bria said. Sira blinked. "I am not going to the capital." "The Alpha King asked who signaled the old relay," Bria said. "When I report back, he will ask to speak with that person." "I signaled it," Sira said. "You can tell him so. He does not need to speak with me." "He will want to," Bria said, with the simple certainty of someone who knew what their Alpha King wanted when he used that particular phrasing. Sira looked at her. "I have work here," she said. "Aldrich can manage," Aldrich said from 2 steps behind her, which was slightly treacherous of him. Sira turned to look at him. He had the expression of a man who had made a decision he was not going to apologize for. "You have done more than could be asked," he said more quietly. "Whatever the capital wants from you, it is a better thing than what brought you here." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the outpost, the small buildings, the fire pit, the well, the window the size of a book that looked out over the eastern tree line. "I will need my things," she said. She collected them in the time it took Bria's team to water their horses. Wool blanket, 2 changes of clothes, tin cup, knife, her mother's shawl, everything still fit in the bundle she had made the night she left her father's house. It was a very small bundle for a person's life, but she had found that small was easier to carry, and she had always prioritized what could be carried. She looked at the room one more time. The shelf now empty, the hook now empty, the cot with its thin mattress. It had been hers for 6 weeks. She closed the door. Owen traveled in the wagon. Sira rode beside it on a compact gray horse that Aldrich had insisted she take, which she suspected was a way of ensuring she could not easily change her mind and turn back. She sat the horse the way she did most things, with a complete absence of drama, upright and steady, looking ahead. Bria rode at the front. The other 3 riders spread around the wagon at protective positions. They moved through the open country as Davin had predicted, slowly in the cold, through terrain that was not friendly to wheels. On the first night, they camped in a hollow in the land that blocked the wind. Bria's team made a fire with the efficiency of people who had done it in worse conditions. Owen slept in the wagon under 3 blankets that Sira had packed. She had also packed dried meat, flatbread, and enough herb tea to last the journey, because packing for journeys was simply a task that needed doing, and she was present and capable of doing it. She sat near the fire on the first night, with her mother's shawl around her shoulders. Bria sat down beside her after the camp was settled. 9 days out, Bria said, might be 8 back if the weather holds. Sira nodded. You have not asked where you will go, Bria said. In the capital, what happens to you there? No, Sarah said. Most people would ask. I will find out when I get there, Sira said. Asking now only fills the time with worry, and the time will pass the same either way. Bria looked at the fire for a moment. You are a very practical person. People keep telling me that, Sira said. It is not an insult. I know, Sira said. I have never taken it as one. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The fire did what fires do. The horses shifted in the dark at the edge of the camp. The Alpha King, Sira said after a time, what is he like? Bria considered this. Sira noticed that she considered it genuinely, not in the way people considered how to package someone for a favorable impression, but in the way people considered an honest question that deserved an honest answer. Precise, Bria said finally, he does not waste words. He does not waste much of anything. A pause. He used to, I think, before the war. People who were there say he was different, but I only know the version that exists now, and the version that exists now is fair. He is fair. He does not move against people who have not given him reason. He is not generous with his trust, but when he gives it, he holds it steady. Sarah listened to this. Is he kind? She said. Bria thought again. He is not unkind, she said carefully. Whether that is the same thing, I am not certain. Sarah nodded slowly. It was, she thought, probably the most honest description of a person she had ever been given. Most people, when asked to describe someone powerful, gave you the version they wanted to believe. Bria had given her the version she had observed. She found she respected that. She added more wood to the fire. Somewhere in the dark, Owen coughed once and was quiet again. The journey continued. 8 nights in the end, the weather held cold and clear, which was miserable for comfort and excellent for visibility. Bria's team moved with the practiced ease of people who had been long enough in difficult terrain to find a rhythm in it. Sira fell into the rhythm of the camp without being asked. Fires, food, water, the small tasks that keep a group of people functional when they are spending their energy on movement. She did not think about what the capital would be like. She thought about Owen's information, turning it over in her mind the way you turn over a problem you cannot quite see the edges of. A network moving women who had been sold by their packs, pack elders taking payment, routes, names. Her name on a list a year before she stood in the gathering field. She had not told anyone this. She had found the list in Owen's coat pocket when she was checking the wound. He had written a partial copy in abbreviated code before his paper was taken, a backup against the possibility that his memory failed him. She had read it without meaning to, and then read it again with full intention. Her name, Sira Aldrin of Greystone, listed with a price and a destination that was not the border outpost. The network had already bought her. Her father's auction had been a performance of legitimacy for a transaction that was already decided. She thought about this for 8 nights. By the time the capital appeared on the horizon on the morning of the 9th day, she had finished thinking about it and moved into a different mode entirely. The mode that came after thinking, the one that was about knowing what needed to happen and beginning to figure out how to make it happen. The capital was larger than anything she had seen. She had known this abstractly. Greystone was a small pack in a peripheral territory, and she had never left it before the outpost. Knowing that something is large and seeing it are different experiences. It sat on a wide hill, walled, with roads running in and out of it like threads, buildings of stone and wood that climbed the hillside. The smell of it reached her before they were close, smoke and food and animals and people, the concentrated smell of many lives in one place. She sat her horse and looked at it for a moment. Bria rode up beside her. Home for the Alpha King, Bria said. Yes, Sarah said. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that the place looked like exactly the kind of place where decisions got made, large, ordered, sure of itself. The kind of place that did not often look east, and when it did, saw only the edges of things. She clicked her tongue. The gray horse moved forward. They rode through the gates in the early afternoon, and the capital swallowed them up the way large things swallow small ones. Without noticing, without ceremony, simply by continuing to be what it was while something new moved into it. She was brought to a holding house near the administrative quarter, clean, organized, impersonal in the way of places maintained for visitors who pass through rather than people who stay. A woman at the door showed her to a room and told her she would be seen by the Alpha King's household steward in the morning. The room was larger than the one at the outpost. She set her bundle down, she hung her mother's shawl on the hook by the door, she put her tin cup on the windowsill. She looked at the city through the window for a long time. Then she went to find where they kept the kitchen, because she was hungry and because cooking something was always a useful way to occupy the part of her mind that would otherwise spend its time making itself anxious about things that could not be resolved tonight. The kitchen staff looked up when she walked in. "Can I help with anything?" she said. There was a pause. "We have it managed," the head cook said, not unkindly. "I know," Sira said, "but I work better when I am doing something. Tell me what needs cutting." The head cook looked at her for a moment with the assessing eye of someone who runs a busy kitchen and has developed strong opinions about people who show up uninvited. Then she handed Sira a knife. Sira cut vegetables for an hour and felt considerably better, which was exactly what she had predicted would happen. She did not see the Alpha King that night, but later, when she was lying in the larger room on the larger bed with her mother's shawl folded on the chair beside her, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside, a particular stride, measured and unhurried, and then silence. She did not know why she was aware of those footsteps, in a way she was not aware of the other footsteps that had passed the door that evening. She put the thought aside. She slept. Kaylan met her at the morning briefing, which was not where he had intended to meet her. He had intended to speak with her in the formal interview room, with Davin present and a scribe and the appropriate structure of an Alpha King receiving testimony from a witness. He had intended it to be organized and measured, because organized and measured was how he preferred things now. After 3 years of learning that the alternative was a landscape he did not want to navigate again. But Owen's debrief ran long. Owen had 14 months of embedded intelligence to deliver, and Kaylan was not the kind of leader who left the room while a man was talking, even when the man had been talking for 3 hours and showed no signs of stopping. And by the time Owen had finished, and the council members had asked their questions and the meeting had concluded, it was past the midday bell. He was walking through the corridor outside the war room when Davin appeared beside him. "The woman from the border outpost," Davin said. "I told you this morning," Kaylan said. "You told me to arrange a formal interview. She told the steward she could speak with you this afternoon. I told the steward to tell her you would send word. She told the steward that she had information that was time-sensitive and that she would prefer not to wait." He stopped walking. Davin stopped too. "She told the steward," Kaylan said. "Yes, that she would prefer not to wait." In those words, Davin said, "I am told she was very polite about it, but firm." Kaylan looked at the corridor wall for a moment. It was a very plain wall, stone, functional, no decoration. He found plain walls useful for thinking. "Where is she?" he said. "Outside, I believe," Davin said. "In the western courtyard. She went there after breakfast. The steward said she seemed to find the formal rooms uncomfortable and asked if she could wait outside." "In this cold?" "Apparently so." He walked to the western courtyard. It was not a large or impressive courtyard. It served the administrative wing rather than the ceremonial one, and its primary features were a stone bench, 2 bare trees, and a view of the western wall. Not scenic, functional. She was sitting on the stone bench, not as a person who is waiting sits, restless, distracted, angled toward the door. She was sitting with her back straight and her hands in her lap, and she appeared to be watching the bare trees with the focused attention of someone who had found something genuinely interesting in them, which was a thing he would not have predicted about those particular trees. He came and stood in front of her. She looked up at him. He had been told she was 24. She looked 24. She also looked like someone who had lived significantly more than 24 years of experience in 24 years of time, which was a thing he recognized because he saw it in the mirror and had found it in several other people in his life. Her eyes were the color of still water, not gray exactly, not blue, the color that happens between the two. She did not stand. This was not disrespect. He could see that immediately. It was simply that she was assessing him in exactly the way he was assessing her, and doing so required staying where she was, and she had decided the assessment was more important than the formality. He sat down on the other end of the stone bench. This surprised her. He could see it in the small change around her eyes, though her face did not move in any large way. "You have information you consider time-sensitive," he said. "Yes," she said. "Owen has already debriefed. He gave us the network details, the routes, the names." "He gave you what he remembered," she said. "There is a partial written copy." Kaylen looked at her. "Owen said the paper was taken," he said. "His paper was taken," she said. She reached into the inside of her coat and produced a folded piece of parchment. It was worn at the folds and slightly stained, as though it had been carried close to a person for some time. He had made a backup copy before they caught him. He sewed it into the lining of his coat. "When I was cleaning his wound, I found it." She held it out. He took it. He unfolded it. He read it. The courtyard was very quiet. "You carried this the whole journey," he said. "Yes." "You did not tell Bria." "No." "Why not?" She was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone thinking about how to lie, but the quiet of someone deciding how much of the truth to give. "I did not know enough about your channels," she said. "Owen said your relay was compromised. I did not know how far up that compromise ran. A piece of paper moving through official hands before it was verified and secured seemed like a risk. A piece of paper in a coat pocket on a woman that no one in the network had any reason to look at twice seemed safer." He looked at her. "You used yourself as a courier," he said. "I used myself as an inconspicuous person," she said, "which is a different thing, and a thing I have considerably more experience with." There was nothing in the way she said this that was self-pitying. It was a statement of practical fact about her place in the world, delivered with the same inflection she might have used to say that she could ride a horse or start a fire. She knew what she was. She had made a tool of it. He looked back at the parchment. Names he had not heard yet. A route variant Owen had not mentioned, either because he had forgotten it or because this backup copy had been made before his memory had organized itself fully. 3 pack elders, marked with small notations in Owen's abbreviated code, who were receiving payment for access to pack records. He read it twice, the second time carefully. "Your name is on this," he said. "Yes," she said. "Listed a year before your pack's harvest claiming." "Yes." The western wall was lit on one side by the midday sun, cold light. The bare trees threw thin shadows across the stone. "I am sorry," he said. She looked at him with those still water eyes. "I did not come here for that," she said. "I came because the information needed to reach you, and you are the one who can act on it. An apology is not action." He had not been spoken to like that in 3 years, perhaps longer. It was not rude. It was simply direct in a way that most people who came before him had calculated out of their approach, aware of what it was to be talking to an alpha king. She either had not done that calculation, or she had done it and arrived at a different conclusion than most people did. "What action would you have me take?" he said. "The 3 elders," she said. "Move on them before the network knows the information has been delivered. If they hear that Owen reached you, they will find ways to disappear the evidence. The routes are the same, they will not move fast. But the people at the top of the payment chain will move very fast if they know they have been found. You have thought about this." "I had 8 nights of travel to think about nothing else," she said. He looked at the parchment, then at her. "How long were you at the border outpost?" he said. 6 weeks. Before that, Greystone Pack." The information about her pack was in the briefing documents Davin had prepared. He had read them this morning, which was how he knew she was 24 and had been dissolved from a mating bond and had been at the outpost as a labor placement. He knew she knew he had access to this information. She was watching him to see what he would do with it. "You signaled the old fire relay," he said. "That system has not been used in 11 years. How did you know about it?" "Cole, one of the soldiers, mentioned the relay tower in passing," she said. "I asked what it was," he explained. "I filed it away as a thing that existed." "And when you needed it?" "I went to the roof," she said, "and used it." He looked at the bare trees. He looked at the parchment in his hands. He looked at the woman sitting on the stone bench in the cold with her back straight and her hands in her lap, who had carried a wounded intelligence courier through a night raid, signaled an ancient system from a rooftop, transported a critical document through 8 days of open country without telling anyone she had it, and who was now sitting in his courtyard telling him what needed to happen next. "You have not asked for anything," he said. She blinked very slightly, as if the sentence had not occurred to her. "That is not why I came," she said. "Most people who come to me with information of this value want something in return." "I am sure they do," she said. "The information needed to reach you, it has reached you, the transaction is complete." He folded the parchment carefully. "Where will you go," he said, "after today?" She looked at the bare trees for a moment. It was the first time something moved across her face that was not assessment or precision, a very small thing, like a cloud shadow crossing the ground. "I have not decided," she said. "I have a room in the holding house. I imagine I have it for a few more days. After that—" She met his eyes. "I will figure it out," she said. "I always have." He stood, she stood too, this time not from obligation but from the natural response of someone who has concluded a conversation. "I will move on the 3 elders today," he said. "Before evening," she said, "if the information is as time-sensitive as Owen believes, every hour." "Before evening," he said. She nodded once, the nod of someone who has delivered what they came to deliver and is ready to return to whatever is next. She turned to go. "Sarah," he said. She stopped. He was not sure why he said it, her name. He had not planned to, he knew it from the briefing documents, and he had not planned to use it, and then he had. She looked back at him. "Do not leave the capital without telling the household steward," he said. "I may need to ask you further questions." A pause, something in her face that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "I will let him know," she said. She walked away, straight-backed, unhurried. The gray coat she wore was plain and slightly worn at the cuffs, and her hair was the dark color of turned earth in the rain, and she crossed the courtyard and went through the door into the administrative wing, and Kaylan stood in the cold and looked at the door for a moment after she had gone. Then he turned and went to find Davin and tell him they needed to move on 3 pack elders before evening. They moved before evening. It was a clean operation. Bria's team again, rested now, plus 6 of the capital's own enforcement wolves. 3 locations, simultaneous, so that none of the 3 could warn the others. By the time the evening bell rang across the capital, all 3 elders were in custody and their records were in Kaylan's war room. The council met until midnight. Kaylan sat at the head of the table and listened to the information unfold, the full shape of the network, piece by piece, the way you uncover something that has been buried by pulling back the layers carefully so that nothing is disturbed. It was, as Owen had described, larger than they had known. 4 years of operation, 3 packs, hundreds of women routed to 3 destinations outside the pack system, labor primarily the worst kind, the kind that did not distinguish between a woman and a tool. The payment chain ran through the 3 elders, up through a middleman in a trade house to the east, and stopped at a name that even the council's most experienced members went quiet about. Kaylan did not go quiet. He wrote the name down, he circled it. "We move on the trade house in the morning," he said. "Tonight we secure the 3 elders' records, tomorrow we follow the routes." The council had questions. He answered them efficiently. By midnight the meeting was done, the work was divided, and the first phase of dismantling something that had been running for 4 years was underway. He walked back to his own wing through the late-night quiet of the capital. He passed the holding house. There was a light in one of the windows. He knew from the briefing documents which room she was in. He did not stop, he kept walking. He went to his own rooms and he sat at the table by the window and he looked at the city for a while the way he had been looking at cities for 3 years without seeing much in them. He was not sure what he was thinking about, possibly the network, possibly the name he had circled, possibly the fact that a woman had sat on a stone bench in a cold courtyard and told him that an apology was not action and had been entirely correct. He had not spoken to someone that directly in a long time. He was not sure how he felt about the fact that he wanted to do it again. He went to bed. He slept better than he had in several months, which was something he noticed and then deliberately stopped thinking about, because the alternative was to think about why, and he was not ready for that particular question yet. The Council of the Alpha King was not a group that made room easily for new things, which was a quality that had once served them well, and now mostly served to make them resistant to exactly the kind of change that the present situation required. They had 12 members. 6 were old enough to remember the last Great War, which had given them the general conviction that they had seen everything. 3 were middle-aged and ambitious, which made them useful and occasionally exhausting. 2 were specialists, 1 for trade law, 1 for pack relations, who said very little in general meetings and a great deal in specific ones. The 12th was Barren, who was Kaelan's second, and whose function was to keep the other 11 from becoming something unmanageable. Sira learned about the council on her 3rd day in the capital, which was the day she was called to a formal testimony session. She sat in the formal interview room, which was, as she had predicted from the steward's description, a room designed to make the person sitting in the small chair feel the full weight of the large table and the larger room, and she answered questions for 2 hours. The questions were detailed, the council members who asked them were thorough. She gave them everything they asked for clearly and without embellishment, because clarity was faster than embellishment, and she wanted to be done. When it was finished, the council elder, a heavy-set man named Pharaoh who had the look of someone who had been important for long enough that he had begun to confuse being important with being right, leaned forward in his chair. "You have been helpful," he said. "The information you carried will be consequential." "Good," she said. "We will be in touch if further questions arise." A pause, the particular pause of a man who is about to say something he has decided sounds like a kindness. "You should know that the capital has a placement office for unattached women from the outer territories. It can find appropriate work." She looked at him. "I am aware that placement offices exist," she said. "Thank you." "The work is usually domestic in nature," he said, "but the pay is fair." She continued looking at him. "I will keep that in mind," she said. She stood and thanked the council for their time, and left the formal interview room, and stood in the corridor outside it for a moment. The corridor was long and stone, and lit by wall lamps at regular intervals. Her reflection in the polished surface of a decorative shield on the opposite wall was small and clear, and looked exactly like a woman who had just been told that the capital had a placement office for people like her. She had not expected more than that. She genuinely had not. She had come to the capital with information that needed delivering, and she had delivered it, and the natural conclusion of that story was that she would now go to the placement office and find work and live in the capital in whatever capacity the capital assigned to her. This was fine. It was more than fine. It was significantly better than standing in a gathering field with rope on her wrists. She was working through this very reasonably when footsteps came from the far end of the corridor. She knew the stride before she looked up. She was not sure when she had learned it. Sometime in the last 3 days, apparently, the particular measured, unhurried stride of a man who moved as though he had always been entirely certain of where he was going, and the only question was how to get there most efficiently. Kaelan stopped a few feet from her. He looked at the interview room door, then at her. "How did it go?" he said. "Well," she said, "they were thorough." He looked at her face. Something in his own face shifted in the way she had learned his face shifted, not large movements but precise ones. "Pharaoh told you about the placement office," he said. She blinked. "He mentioned it." "He mentions it to everyone from the outer territories," Kaelan said. "It is his shorthand for your usefulness has been extracted, and you may now be processed appropriately." The bluntness of this surprised her. Not because it was untrue, it was exactly what had happened, but because she had not expected him to say it. "He is not wrong," she said. "I am from the outer territory. The placement office is a reasonable option." "It is an option," he said. "Is there another one?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. The corridor was empty. The lamps did their steady work. "I would like you to remain available to the network investigation," he said. "You have a better understanding of how this particular situation runs on the ground than anyone else in the capital currently does. The information on that parchment is a beginning, not an ending. There will be more interviews as we follow the routes." She considered this. For how long, she said. Until the investigation is complete. And where would I stay? In the holding house, or alternative accommodation if you prefer, the capital will cover it. She was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about the placement office, and the domestic work with its fair pay, and the small room in a house that would belong to someone else, and the morning fire she would build in a kitchen that was not hers. She was also thinking about the stone bench in the western courtyard, and the bare trees, and the man who had sat on the other end of the bench and said he was sorry in a way that she had not expected, and who had moved on 3-pack elders before evening without her having to argue the point. "All right," she said. He nodded, turned to leave. "Kaylan," she said. He stopped. He looked back at her in the way he had looked back when she said his name in the courtyard, not startled, but attentive. She had not planned to say anything else. She was not sure why she had called after him. "The trade house," she said. "The route information on Owen's copy was slightly different from what he would have given you in the debrief. There is a secondary distribution point. It was not on the main list. I noticed it because the code notation was different from the others, a small mark that looked like an abbreviation rather than a location code." She reached into her coat pocket and produced a slip of paper on which she had written the notation down from memory. He came back, he took the paper. He read it, his face went through something she could not quite name. "How did you know this was significant?" he said. "I did not know," she said. "I thought it might be. I am not a code reader, but it looked different from the others, and things that look different usually mean something." He looked at her for a long moment. "The mark you have written here," he said, "is the notation Owen's network used for what we call a holding point, not a distribution location, a place where people are kept while the transfers are arranged." The corridor was very quiet. "That is a different thing," she said. "Yes," he said, "that is a significantly different thing." A pause. "It means there is a facility, physical location, currently operational." He looked at the paper. "We had not identified this." She thought about what that meant, people currently there. Currently inside a holding point that no one had known existed. "How quickly can you move on it?" she said. "Tonight," he said, "if the location can be pinpointed from this notation." "Can it?" "Owen will know," he said. He was already turning the paper in his hand, the particular focus on his face that she had begun to recognize as the face of a man who had received a new piece of information and was already 2 steps ahead of it. "Davin is with him now. Give me an hour." He went, fast now, the unhurried stride replaced by something with an edge to it. She stood in the corridor alone. She thought about a holding point, physical location, currently operational. She thought about being listed on a piece of paper a year before anyone told her she was going to be sold. She found the wall with one hand, not because she needed to hold herself up, simply because the stone was there, solid and cold and real, and she wanted something real under her hand for a moment while the full shape of what she had been part of as object, as carrier, now as something else, assembled itself in her mind. She stayed like that for 30 seconds, maybe 40. Then she stood straight. She moved her hand away from the wall. She went back to the holding house and made herself useful in the kitchen until someone came to tell her what had been found, because being useful was what she did when the thinking was finished and the acting had not started yet, and the in-between time needed to be filled with something, and something useful was better than something not. She chopped vegetables for an hour and a half. Then Davin appeared in the kitchen doorway. "We found the location," he said. She set down the knife. "How many?" she said. He paused. He looked at her with the careful eyes of a man who had been in difficult situations for long enough to know how to deliver difficult information. 31, he said. She was quiet. "Is he moving tonight?" she said. "He is already gone," Davin said. "He left 20 minutes ago with Bria's team and 6 others." She picked the knife back up. She finished the vegetables. Her hands were steady. Kaylan returned at dawn. She knew when he arrived because the holding house, which was close enough to the administrative wing to share its general heartbeat, changed character, not loudly, but in the way places change when the person who organizes their gravity comes back into them. A different quality of movement in the corridors. The sound of Davin's voice at a slightly higher energy than his usual midnight careful register. She was already awake. She had not slept again, which was becoming something of a pattern in her life at this point, and which she was prepared to accept as the cost of caring about things. She heard his footsteps in the corridor. She heard them stop outside her door. A knock. She opened it. He looked like a man who had ridden fast in the cold and arrived at something that had used up a significant portion of whatever he had started the night with. Not broken, but used. There was mud on his coat and a cut on the left side of his jaw that was shallow but recent, and his eyes had the quality that eyes get after a night of seeing things that cannot be unseen. 31, he said. All out, no casualties on our side. She held onto the doorframe. Not because she was weak, because she had spent a night holding herself still and the information had weight, and some weight needs a surface to rest against. Are they safe? She said. Some are hurt, none critically. We have physicians with them. They are being brought into the capital. He paused. It will take time for them. A place like that, it takes time to come out of. Yes, she said, it does. He looked at her. She looked back at him without explaining the way she had said that, because there was nothing to explain. He had already understood. The trade house, he said, we took it too. The man at the top of the payment chain is in custody. And the elders? Still in custody, going to formal proceeding. He exhaled through his nose one slow breath. This will take months to fully dismantle. There are 3 additional routes we have not yet run to their end points. Owen is well enough to work, but it will take time. She nodded. I want you on the investigation formally, he said, not as a witness, as an advisor. She blinked. I am not trained for that, she said. You found the secondary distribution point when 4 trained intelligence officers had not, he said. You read code you had never seen before in a language of notation you were not familiar with, and you identified the one element that led to the single most significant discovery of the entire operation. I'm not particularly interested in what you are trained for. I'm interested in what you do. She looked at him for a long moment. The corridor was gray with early light, cold. He smelled like horses and wet earth and the particular outdoors smell of a night that has been demanding. All right, she said. He nodded once. She thought he was going to leave. He stayed. You should know, he said, that your father's name is on the secondary route documents, not as a seller. As a receiver of payment, from the Elder Network for providing access to Greystone's women without formal protest. The doorframe was very solid under her hand. She had thought about this possibility. She had thought about it at some point between the 3rd and 5th night of travel, when she was working through the network architecture and the names on Owen's list, and the notation she had found and what it all connected to. She had thought about it and placed it carefully to one side, in the way you place something that needs to be dealt with eventually in a spot where it will not get in the way of the things that need to be dealt with now. Now was apparently later. I see, she said. He will go to formal proceeding, Kaylan said, as one of many. It will be public record. Good, she said. He was watching her face. She kept it the way she always kept it, steady, present, not performing anything in either direction. Is that the only thing you want to say about it? He said. She thought about this honestly. I thought he would find a way to make money off me eventually, she said. He just found it earlier than I realized. A pause. I am angrier about the people who could not find their way to a rooftop with a lantern than I am about him. He is a small person. The network made use of small people. The thing to dismantle is the network. He looked at her in a way that was hard to describe precisely. Not admiration exactly, something more complicated and more searching than that. As if he was looking at her and also looking at the thing behind her that had shaped her into this. The gathering field, the rope, the horizon, all of it, and finding in the combination something he had not expected to find. I am going to sleep for 4 hours, he said. You should, she said. The formal review of the route documents begins at noon. Davin will bring you in. I will be ready, she said. He turned. Kaylan, she said. He looked back again. It was becoming a pattern between them, the afterthought that was not quite an afterthought, the calling back that both of them kept doing. The cut on your jaw should be cleaned, she said. The mud on it will slow the healing. He reached up and touched it briefly, as though he had forgotten it was there. Davin will, he started. Davin will forget, she said. He has 12 things to manage this morning, and a cut on someone's jaw is not going to be first on the list. She stepped back from the door. I have what I need, come in. He came in. She found the cloth and the water that the holding house provided in the small washstand in the corner. She turned to him, and he sat down on the chair by the wall because there was a particular practical logic in what she had said, and he appeared to have recognized it. She cleaned the cut. He sat still for it with the stillness of a man who was very tired and also not accustomed to being looked after, which she recognized as its own kind of wound, the quiet one that comes from spending a long time being the person who does everything for everyone else. Her hands were steady. She was always steadiest when she was doing something useful with them. You are good at this, he said quietly. I have had practice, she said. Border outpost soldiers cut themselves fairly regularly. I imagined. She finished. She stepped back. He looked up at her. They were very close. The room was small, and the chair was near the wall, and the geometry had organized itself so that close was the only option, and she was aware of this as a fact the way she was aware of most facts, clearly, without drama, noting what it was. Thank you, he said. Sleep 4 hours, she said. The route documents will still be there at noon. He stood. He was a large presence in a small room, and the standing made the proximity more apparent, and she was aware of that too. He went to the door. I read your intake file, he said, with his hand on the door frame. The one Aldrich sent, the placement documents from Greystone. She waited. You were listed as a labor placement, he said, level 3. That is the classification for women who are considered non-viable for any other purpose. She kept her face still. I know what I was classified as, she said. I know you know, he said. He looked at her over his shoulder. I wanted you to know that I had read it, because I did not want to be another person who knew and said nothing. He left. She stood in the small room with the gray morning coming through the window and the cloth still in her hand, and she thought about that for a long time. He had not said it was wrong, he had not promised her anything. He had simply said, I know, and I did not want to say nothing, which was such a small thing, which was also not small at all. She folded the cloth. She put her tin cup on the windowsill where the light could reach it. She waited for noon. The route document review became the organizing principle of the next 3 weeks. Every day at noon, Sira came to the war room. Every day she sat at the large table with Davin and Owen, who was on his feet properly now, if still careful, and 2 of the council's intelligence advisors, and they worked through the network documents piece by piece. She was not trained in intelligence work. This turned out to matter less than Kaylan had predicted and she had feared. What she was trained in by 24 years of being underestimated and surviving it was noticing things, small discrepancies, patterns that looked almost right but not quite. The kind of detail that people who were accustomed to looking at large structures tended to move past because they were looking for the big shape. She found the route variant for the secondary eastern corridor on day 4. She found the financial discrepancy in the trade house accounts on day 9. She identified the third holding point, not from documents but from a conversation she had with one of the 31 women who had been recovered, who mentioned in passing a detail about the timing of her transfer that did not match the documents they had. Sira had simply asked a follow-up question, and then another, and by the end of the conversation she had an address. Owen, when she brought him the address, looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between professional respect and personal astonishment. You are frightening, he said, and clearly meant it as the highest possible compliment. I listen well, she said. People say things they don't mean to when they feel safe. Making people feel safe is not difficult. You simply pay attention to them and do not make them feel watched. Most intelligence officers spend years trying to learn that. Most intelligence officers are people who were given power early and had to learn downward, she said. I started the other way. Kaylan was not in the war room every day. He was in the war room more often than not, but he was also running a territory and a council and an ongoing formal proceeding against 7 arrested individuals, which consumed significant time. When he was in the war room, the dynamic shifted in ways that she found she was aware of and did not make a particular effort to analyze. He sat across the table from her, usually. He asked her questions with a directness that was different from Davin's directness. Davin asked questions to gather information. Kaylin asked questions to understand what she thought about the information. She began to notice that she was thinking about things differently when she knew he might ask her about them, not changing what she thought, but articulating it more fully to herself so that she could articulate it to him. This seemed like a reasonable adaptation to her working environment. She told herself this firmly. It was on the evening of the 19th day that he found her in the western courtyard again. She had taken to coming there in the evenings. The bare trees had begun to show the earliest evidence of buds, very small and not impressive, but there if you looked carefully, and she had developed the habit of checking them each day to see how much progress had been made. She was doing this when she heard his footsteps on the courtyard stones. He sat on the bench, the same stone bench, the other end, without being invited. This was, she had come to understand, how he did things. Not assuming that she wanted his company, but not asking either. Arriving and making himself present, and letting her decide what to do with that. She sat back down. The preceding dates have been set, he said. 2 months from now it will be public. Good, she said, it should be public. Your father will be named in open session. She looked at the budding trees. I know, she said. Will that be difficult? She thought about this honestly, the way she thought about most things. No, she said, I think it will feel like a door closing, a door I have been looking at for a long time. She paused. Difficult things and painful things are not always the same. This will be painful probably in the way that everything involving him is painful. But I do not think I will be surprised by anything I hear. He was quiet beside her for a moment. I want to ask you something, he said, and I want to be clear that it is a question, not a decision. There is no expectation in the asking. She turned to look at him. His face was doing the thing it sometimes did, the careful thing, the precise thing, where he was choosing words the way other people chose paths through difficult terrain. The investigation will run for months, he said, possibly longer. You have contributed things that no one else has contributed, and I expect that will continue. I would like to formalize your role here, not as a temporary advisor, as a permanent one. She waited. She could feel that there was more. The council will object, he said. Some of them, Pharaoh has already expressed a view about your background. He met her eyes. Your background in general, your status, the fact that you were at a border outpost and why. She understood what he was not saying directly, which was that Pharaoh had used the word Barren in a sentence that had reached Kaylan's ears and produced a result that was currently being described to her very carefully. What did you say to him? She said. I told him that the quality of a person's insight was not determined by whether they had produced children, Kaylan said, and that I would appreciate it if he confined his assessment criteria to relevant matters. She looked at him. He will not stop, she said. No, Kaylan said, he will not. He is a man who needs things to be in their correct categories, and you do not fit the categories he has available. That has always been my problem, she said. It has always been everyone else's problem with you, he said, which is a different thing. She was quiet. The evening had gone very still. The western wall had lost the last of the sun and gone to the flat gray that was its natural color. You said it was a question, she said. Yes. You have not asked it yet. He was quiet for a moment. I would like you to stay, he said, properly, not as a witness and not as a temporary person passing through, as someone who belongs here. Another pause. I recognize that belonging here was not something offered to you. I am offering it now. She looked at the trees. She looked at the stone bench under her, the cold of it through her coat, the particular quality of the light in this courtyard at this hour, which she had now seen 19 times and which she had found, gradually and somewhat against her expectations, that she looked forward to. She thought about Greystone, the gathering field, the rope, the horizon. She thought about a storage room and a wounded man, and a lantern on a rooftop and 8 nights of open country, with a piece of paper in her coat. She thought about a room in the holding house, with a tin cup on the windowsill. She looked at him. He was looking at the trees with the same focus she had been using, not looking at her, deliberately, giving her the space to decide without the weight of being watched. She noticed this. I have been a practical person all my life, she said. I make practical decisions. I go where I need to go and I do what needs doing and I try not to want things that are not available. He said nothing, listening. I am not sure, she said slowly, whether staying here is a practical decision or a decision about wanting something. He turned to look at her then. Does the difference matter? He said. She held his gaze for a moment. I have not thought of wanting as something that was allowed, she said. That is a longer answer. I know, he said, take the time. She looked at the trees again. The buds were there, very small and very certain. They did not ask permission to arrive. Yes, she said. He was quiet. Yes, you will stay, he said, not assuming, checking. Yes, she said again, I will stay. Something in his face moved, not large. Nothing Kaylin did was large, but something shifted, the very small and controlled shift of a man whose face had been managing itself carefully for a long time and who had just received something that the management could not entirely contain. Good, he said. They sat in the courtyard for another hour as the evening settled around them, not because there was more to say, but because neither of them moved, and neither of them felt the need to. The trees budded in the dark. The wall held the cold. The city moved around them on all sides, and inside it, 31 women were in warm rooms with physicians and food, and the beginning of something that would take much longer than a day but had at least been started. The council objected, as Kaylin had said they would. 3 weeks after Sira officially took the role of investigation advisor, Pharaoh requested a private meeting with the Alpha King. Kaylin granted it, as he granted all council requests, and sat at the table while Pharaoh organized his position with the care of a man who had decided what he wanted to say and arranged it in what he believed was the most effective order. Pharaoh used the word unsuitable 4 times in 7 minutes. He used background as a word that was meant to carry additional weight beyond its surface meaning, the weight of gathering fields and ropes and dissolution records, and the category called without fruit. He used appearances, once, which Kaylin found to be the most interesting of all the words, because appearing suitable was a thing that functioned only in relation to what the audience was prepared to accept. Kaylin sat with his hands flat on the table and listened to all of it. She is not a permanent fixture of this court, Pharaoh concluded. Whatever her usefulness in this specific investigation, when the investigation concludes, the role concludes with it. The capital has a placement office. I know about the placement office, Kaylin said. And it can find her appropriate work suited to someone of her background, Kaylin said. Pharaoh stopped. Kaylin looked at him steadily. I have heard your position, he said. I will consider it. Which was what he said when he had heard a position, and was not going to change anything, but preferred not to say so directly in a way that would make the next 6 months of council meetings unnecessarily combative. He told Davin about the meeting afterward. Davin listened with the expression he wore when he was thinking several things simultaneously and selecting one to say. The council will not be the only voice, Davin said. The pack elders who come to the great convening, there are 9 of them outside your own. They will have views. They always have views, Kaylin said. Views about her specifically, Davin said, when it becomes known that she is here in an ongoing official capacity, when it is clear what that means. What does it mean? Kaylin said directly. Davin looked at him with the eyes of a man who had known him for a long time. You tell me, Davin said. He told Davin. Not that afternoon. But 2 weeks later, after a night that had started as a war room session reviewing the final route documents and had turned into something else in the hours after midnight when the documents were finished, and Owen had gone to bed, and the fire had burned low and Sira had said something about the nature of the network, about how it had depended on everyone agreeing not to look too closely, how it had run on the willingness of people in power to treat certain lives as having less weight than others. And Kaylin had listened and then said something back, and then she had said something back. And it had gone on like that for 2 hours until the fire was a dim red, and the night was very quiet, and he understood with the precise clarity of a man who no longer lied to himself about what he knew that what he wanted to do was not say another word. He walked her to the door of her room. She looked at him. He looked at her. Sarah, he said. I know, she said. "Is it all right?" he said. She looked at him with those still-water eyes in the corridor's lamplight. "I will tell you if it is not," she said. "I have never had difficulty saying the things I mean." "I know," he said. "Then you know that when I say yes, I mean yes," she said. He took her hand. This was all a hand. Her fingers were warm, and the grip she gave back was immediate and real, and they stood in the corridor for a moment that was not about any of the practical things either of them was so good at. Then she went in. He stood outside the door. He told Davin the next morning. Davin listened. He was quiet for a longer time than usual. Then he said, "The great convening is in 6 weeks. The formal proceeding against the network elders is in 2 months. "Yes," Kalen said. "If you intend to make any kind of declaration at the convening." "I do," Kalen said. Davin was quiet again. "They will push back," he said. "The council, the visiting elders, Pharaoh." "Yes. It will not be comfortable." "No," Kalen said. "But comfortable has not been a particularly useful standard for me to apply to decisions." Davin looked at him, the long look of a man who has known someone through their best version and their worst version and their rebuilt version, and who is now looking at what might be the beginning of a 4th version. "I think," Davin said carefully, "that this is the first time in 3 years that I have seen you make a decision based on what you want rather than what is strategically optimal." Kaylan considered this. "Is that a problem?" he said. "No," Davin said. "I think it is the opposite of a problem." He paused. "I will prepare the convening agenda," he said. "Leave room at the close." He found Sira in the western courtyard that evening. The trees had continued their progress. The buds had become small leaves, pale and tentative, the green of things that are still deciding how much to commit. She was standing near them rather than sitting on the bench, her coat pulled around her and her breath making small clouds in the air. She heard him coming and did not turn immediately. He had noticed that she always gave him a moment when he approached, not ignoring him, but finishing whatever she was thinking, giving it its proper conclusion before she looked up. He found this admirable. He found most things about her admirable, which was not a word he was accustomed to applying to people, not because people were not admirable, but because he had spent 3 years keeping most of what he felt about things at a managed distance. The distance had been getting harder to maintain since a stone bench in a cold courtyard. She turned. He told her about the convening. Not everything, not the declaration he intended, because that was something that needed to be said in the right way at the right moment, and not delivered as advance information to be processed in private. But he told her about the schedule, about what the convening meant, the gathering of all pack elders and senior members in the territory for the formal reporting of the Alpha King's work in the past year, and the direction of the year to come. "Will you be there?" he said. "Am I invited?" she said. "I am inviting you now," he said. She looked at the leaves. "The council will not like that," she said. "The council's comfort is not the primary consideration," he said. She looked at him. "What is the primary consideration?" she said. He held her gaze. "You," he said simply. She did not look away. She also did not say anything for a moment, which he had learned meant she was taking it seriously, processing it with the thoroughness she gave everything. "All right," she said. He reached out, he took her hand again as he had the night outside her door. She took it back in the same way, immediate, real, no hesitation. They stood by the almost budded trees for a while, in the way people stand when they are not in a hurry to be anywhere else. The city moved around them. He thought about what he was going to do in 6 weeks. He did not feel uncertain about it. That was the thing about deciding something when you have spent long enough thinking it through. The decision, when it comes, is simply clear. There is no more work to do. The work is done. What remains is just the doing of it. He had not been looking forward to anything in 3 years. He looked forward to this. The great convening was held in the main courtyard of the capital, the large one, the ceremonial one with the high walls and the stone dais, and the capacity for hundreds of people to stand and see and hear what was happening at the front of it. It was held once a year, and it was always full. Pack elders from across the territory came with their senior members. The capital's own population gathered in the surrounding spaces. Council members stood in the formal rows to the right of the dais. Visiting dignitaries and senior officials took the positions to the left. It lasted 2 hours at minimum and longer when the business required it. Kaylan stood on the dais for the full opening session. He gave the territorial report, the year's events, the current conditions, the work in progress. He was precise and direct and moved through it at the same pace he moved through everything without performance. This was what they had come for, and this was what he gave them. The network investigation was covered in the third section. He laid out the facts plainly: the discovery, the operation, the arrests, the recovery of 31 people from a holding point that had been running for 4 years. He named the elders who were awaiting formal proceeding. He described the network scope. The courtyard was very quiet during this part. The kind of quiet that comes not from inattention, but from the opposite, from people absorbing something that has weight. Pharaoh stood in his council row with the expression of a man who had processed all of this, and was now waiting for the next item on the agenda to restore the normal order of things. Sira stood at the far left edge of the dais level, not on the dais itself, but at the stone steps that led to it. She was wearing the gray coat. Her mother's shawl was around her shoulders. Her hair was down, which was a choice she had made that morning in the way she made most choices, practically, having decided that if she was going to stand in a courtyard full of people, she would do it as herself and not as a version of herself arranged for appearance. She had not asked what was going to happen. He had told her the night before that there would be something at the close of the convening that she needed to be present for. She had said, "All right." She had looked at him with those Stillwater eyes and understood that whatever was coming was something he had decided with the kind of certainty that did not require her to prepare for it, only to be present for it. She was present. He reached the end of the formal agenda. He paused. The natural close of a convening had a particular rhythm that the assembled elders and council and population recognized: a final statement, a formal acknowledgement, the end. He stepped to the right side of the dais, not the center, the side nearest where she was standing. Pharaoh's eyes moved. He saw the direction of the movement, and something in his face rearranged. 2 of the visiting elders exchanged a glance. Kaylan stepped off the dais entirely. He stepped down the 3 stairs. He walked to where she was standing. The courtyard was completely still. Hundreds of people watching a man who had not left the center of a dais during a great convening in the memory of anyone present. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him. Her face was still. Her eyes were clear. He had planned what he was going to say. He had gone through it the night before, and again this morning, precise, formal, the words a declaration required. Looking at her, he simplified. "I should have said this privately first," he said, quietly enough that it was almost between them and not for the courtyard. "I apologize for the audience." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. "You said you might need to ask me further questions," she said, the same quiet. "I have one more," he said. He took her hand, in front of all of them. "Stay," he said. Not the way he had said it in the courtyard by the trees, as an offer, a question with space around it for her to decide in her own time. This was different. This was in front of witnesses. This was a declaration in the form of a request, because he was still the same man who did not take without asking, but asking in front of everyone turned the asking into something that could not be undone, and he wanted the undoing to be impossible. She looked at him for a moment. The courtyard waited. The council elder dropped his gaze to the ground and then raised it again. Pharaoh had the expression of a man watching something he had not prepared a response to. "You are claiming me," she said, quiet, direct, the way she said everything. "In every sense," he said, "if you will allow it." She looked at their joined hands. She looked at the courtyard full of people who had very specific and long-standing ideas about who was appropriate, and what belonging looked like, and what a woman who had been listed as without fruit, at a harvest claiming, was worth in the calculus of a great territory. She looked at him. "You understand," she said, "that this will cause considerable difficulty." "I am told that regularly," he said, "about most of the decisions I care about." She was quiet for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, an elder from the Western Territories let out a short breath. A council member shifted his weight. Pharaoh pressed his lips together. Davin stood completely still with the stillness of someone who already knew the answer and was simply waiting for it to be said. "Yes," she said. He brought her hand to his lips, a formal gesture, old form, the acknowledgement that a claim had been made and received and was now a thing that existed in the world and could not be walked back. 3 seconds of silence in the courtyard. Then the council elder, not Pharaoh, but a quieter man named Marcus who had spent 40 years in pack service and who had been watching the investigation documentation with quiet attention for the past month, put his hands together. He clapped. One person, and then two, and then the soldiers along the wall. Bria was there, Sira noticed at the far end, and Bria clapped without any expression at all, which was the highest possible form of Bria's approval. And then more, spreading through the courtyard, the way things spread, when people who have been waiting to see what everyone else will do finally see that it is safe to decide for themselves. Pharaoh did not clap. Neither did 2 of the visiting elders. 3 others did, though, including the elder from the southern territories, who was generally considered to be the most traditional of the visiting 9, and whose participation had a significance that several people in the courtyard registered and catalogued for later. She stood with her hand in his and let it all wash over her, not performing anything, not closing off from it, simply receiving it the way she received most things that were too large to push back against. He turned to face the courtyard. "The convening is concluded," he said. "Business of the council continues at the afternoon session." And that was that. Not simple, not resolved. The afternoon session was the first of many conversations that would be difficult and repetitive, and require him to have the same argument in different rooms with different people for months. But finished in its essential form, the thing that needed to happen had happened, and it had happened in front of everyone, and the witnessing was the whole point of it. He walked with her out of the main courtyard, and through the archway to the administrative wing, and they were barely out of sight of the main courtyard before she stopped. He stopped too. She looked at him. "You did not ask me beforehand," she said. "No," he said. "You assumed I would say yes." "No," he said. "I hoped, and I was prepared to have made an enormous public mistake if you said no." She looked at him for a moment. "That would have been a very large mistake," she said. "Yes," he said. Something that was unmistakably a smile, small, private, belonging only to this moment and this corridor, and not to the courtyard behind them, moved across her face. "The council will petition," she said. "Yes," he said. "Some of them will argue succession." "Yes." "Pharaoh will." "Be Pharaoh," he said. "I have managed Pharaoh for 3 years. I expect to continue managing Pharaoh." She nodded. "The formal proceeding for the network elders is in 6 weeks," she said. "Your position will be stronger after it concludes. The public record of the network, the people named in it, the documentation, it will be harder for the council to argue standard categories in the face of what those categories enabled." He looked at her. "You have been thinking about the political strategy," he said. "Since the convening date was set," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You were not surprised by what I did out there," he said, realizing it, "not entirely." She held his gaze. "You sat on the other end of a bench," she said, "in the cold, when you could have stood and been the Alpha King and I would have stood and been impressed. You sat down." A pause. "I have been paying attention to you for 2 months." He thought about the bench, the bare trees, a woman who watched things that other people moved past. "What conclusion did you reach?" he said. She looked at him with those still-water eyes that had held the horizon at a gathering field without breaking. "That you are a person who does the necessary thing even when it is not the easy thing," she said, "and that is a very rare quality, and that I seem to have a difficult time being in any vicinity of it without wanting to stay." He took her hand again, properly this time, both of them standing in the corridor with no courtyard full of witnesses, no formal gesture, simply 2 people in a quiet hallway. "Good," he said. She let out a very quiet breath that might have been a laugh, or might have been something smaller and more personal than that. They walked back to the administrative wing together. The petitions came in within 2 days. 3 visiting elders submitted formal objections to the claim. Their objections cited tradition and succession, and the established criteria for a formal claim by an Alpha King. They used the language that such documents always used: careful, formal, impersonal. But the meaning underneath the careful language was the same meaning that had lived underneath every careful, formal, impersonal sentence Sira had been on the receiving end of her entire life. The category mattered more than the person. Kaylan read the petitions at his war table with Davin beside him. He read them carefully, in the way he read everything without rushing, giving each sentence its full weight. Then he put them in a folder and handed the folder to Davin. "We will respond through formal channels," he said. "The proceeding is in 5 weeks. After the network elders are formally sentenced and the full record is public, I want the petition responses filed on the same day." Davin understood. The timing was not coincidence, it was architecture. The formal proceeding would put into public record the full documentation of the network, the 4 years of operation, the 3-pack elders, the trade house, the holding points, the routes, the payment chain running through pack structures that had decided certain women were expendable categories rather than people. Responding to the succession petitions on the same day meant that anyone reading them would be doing so with that record freshly in mind. Sira had told him to move before evening, when Owen's information had first arrived. She had spent months thinking about the right timing. He had paid attention. Pharaoh did not submit a formal petition. He submitted something more uncomfortable, a request for a private council meeting, attended by all 12 council members to discuss the fitness of current arrangements. This was the kind of request that technically required accommodation, because it was within council rights, and Kaylan granted it, as he granted all things that were within council rights. He attended the meeting and sat at the head of the table, and listened to 11 people organize their concerns, some of them with genuine worry, and some with the specific quality of objection that comes from categories being rearranged. When they were finished, he said the following. He said that the investigation had recovered 31 people from a network that had operated for 4 years, because the packs had collectively decided that certain lives carried less weight than others, and that the documentation of that network was about to become public record, and that the fitness of arrangements was a question he was comfortable letting the public record speak to. He said that the claim had been made formally and witnessed, and could not be unmade, and that his confidence in the choice was not a thing that council meetings were going to alter. He said that Sira would be remaining in her role as investigation advisor for the foreseeable future, because she was extraordinary at it, and that anyone in the council who had further objections to this on the grounds of her background was welcome to bring them to him directly rather than circulating them through back channels, where they would remain unaddressed, because he was not going to address things that were not said to him plainly. Then he asked if there was any other business. Pharaoh pressed his lips together. Marcus, the quiet council member who had clapped first in the courtyard, said that he had no further business. 5 others said the same. The meeting ended. Davin fell into step beside him in the corridor afterward. 6, Davin said, out of 12. 7 if you count yourself, Kaylan said. I always count myself, Davin said. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment. She told the steward this morning, Davin said, that the 4th petition route, the one from the eastern border territories that we have not been able to trace to its end point, might be found through the trade records of the distribution center rather than the courier records. She has been cross-referencing the financial ledgers. Kaylan did not stop walking. Did she find it? He said. She is still working on it, Davin said, but she found a discrepancy in the ledger that she says is the same kind of pattern as the one in the trade house accounts. She thinks it will lead to a 4th route anchor point. He thought about this. If she finds a 4th route, he said, that is 4 out of an estimated 5 total. Yes, Davin said. One more, he said, thinking. The 5th route has always been the one with the least documentation. Owen had the least on it. The notation on his backup copy barely covered it. She knows, Davin said. She asked Owen about it this morning. He said what he remembered. She is working backward from the financial side now. Kaylan stopped walking. He stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he said she is going to find it. Yes, Davin said, I believe she is. He started walking again. He found her that evening in the war room, not in the western courtyard. She had stayed late. The financial ledgers spread across half the table, her tin cup full of herb tea sitting beside her the way it always did. a small and permanent fixture of wherever she was working. She looked up when he came in. "I think I have it," she said. He sat down across from her. She showed him the ledger entry, a number in a column that should have been a different number, and what that difference translated to when you ran it through the distribution pattern, and where the pattern pointed when you followed it east. He looked at it. He looked at her. She was tired, he could see that. Late nights had accumulated in the weeks since the convening. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and there was a mark from the edge of a document on the back of her hand where she had rested it against the paper. She was also entirely focused and entirely present in a way that he had come to recognize as her particular version of aliveness, not performance, not effort, simply the state she was in when she was doing something that mattered to her. "It is the last one," she said. "Yes," he said. "When you move on it." "Tomorrow morning," he said, "with Light, Bria's team and 4 others." She nodded. He looked at the ledger, then at her. "Go to sleep," he said. She blinked. "I was going to." "The ledger will be here in the morning," he said. "You have found what needed finding, the rest is morning work." She looked at him. "You said the same thing to Owen," she said. "In the storage room the first night, he told me." "Did he?" "He said you have a habit of telling people to sleep when they have done the thing they needed to do and are still awake trying to do more of it." He said nothing. "You do it too," she said. "I have noticed. You manage everyone's rest except your own." "That is," he said, "probably true." She got up. She collected the relevant pages from the ledger and organized them into the correct folder, because she organized things before she left them even when she was tired, because she was the kind of person who did that. She put the tin cup back on the corner of the table. She came around to his side. She put her hand on his shoulder, not a dramatic gesture, a real one, the hand of a person who knows how to touch someone in a way that is not about performance and is not about anything other than contact. "Come and sleep," she said. He looked up at her. She looked down at him with those still-water eyes that had been looking at things clearly for 24 years in all kinds of light, and that were looking at him now with the same clarity and no particular agenda. He stood. They left the war room together. The formal proceeding against the 7 network members was public, as Kaylan had said it would be. It ran for 2 days, the public record was read in full, the financial documentation was presented. Owen testified for 4 hours on the first day. 3 of the recovered women testified on the second day briefly, and the courtroom was very quiet for all of it, the kind of quiet that is not comfortable but is necessary, the kind that comes when people are required to sit still with something they would rather look away from. The sentencing was swift, PAC law in matters of this scale was clear, and the judges were thorough. Kaylan sat through both days. Sierra sat 3 seats to his right. She had considered, when the preceding dates were confirmed, whether to sit with the general public or in the formal section. She had decided on the formal section without too much internal debate, because she was an investigation advisor, and this was the conclusion of the investigation she had been part of, and she belonged in the section for people who had been part of it. Pharaoh, from 4 seats to Kaylan's left, noticed where she sat. She was aware of this and was not moved by it. Her father was named in the public record on the second day, a sentence and a half, his name, his payment, the access he had provided, the receiving that had preceded the selling. She had told Kaylan this would feel like a door closing. It did, not with drama, simply with the particular, flat finality of a thing that is now complete, that has been given its proper place in a public record, where it cannot be quietly revised or forgotten or reframed. After the proceeding, Davin filed the petition responses, on the same day as planned. The 3 visiting elders who had petitioned read the responses on the same day. They finished reading the full public record of the network proceeding. One withdrew the petition within a week, no formal statement, simply a withdrawal. A second submitted a request to speak with Kaylan directly. He granted it. The elder was a careful man named Edmund who had run a mid-territory PAC for 30 years and whose objection had been, Kaylan understood, more about uncertainty than conviction. The conversation was long and substantive, and concluded with Edmund saying that he thought the proceedings' public record had illuminated certain things he had not previously considered as connected. Kaylan said that was the intention. Edmund left satisfied, or at least less unsatisfied. The third elder maintained the petition. He was a traditionalist of the exact variety that Pharaoh was certain of categories, resistant to rearrangement. Kaylan filed the formal response and moved on, because some things could not be convinced, and the only correct response was to let them sit in their own position while the rest of the world proceeded. Bria moved on the 5th route the morning after the ledger discovery. She brought back 23 people. She also brought back documentation, papers found at the anchor point that contained names Sira had not yet found in any of the documents, running a 6th route that had been so quietly embedded in the standard trade structure that Owen had never known it existed. Owen, when presented with this information, said something unprintable and then apologized. Sira told him there was nothing to apologize for. He had done 14 months of embedded work under conditions that were trying to kill him. That he had found what he found was already more than could have been reasonably asked. "But we are not done," she said. "No," Owen said, "apparently not." She worked on the 6th route. It took her 3 weeks. The 6th route was the most carefully hidden of all of them, embedded in the structure of a trading company that had been operating legally for decades, and had buried the illegal element in a layer of bookkeeping that required significant patience to separate from the legitimate operation. She was patient. She found it. Kaylan watched her work through the final push of it, the late nights, the cross-referencing, the methodical following of one small thread until it connected to another, and then to another until the full shape of the 6th route was visible and documented and ready. He brought her tea at midnight on the night she finished, not because Davin was not there or because no one else could have done it, because he wanted to. She looked up when he came in. He set the cup down beside her existing cup, which was empty. She looked at the 2 cups and then at him. "I finished," she said. "I know," he said. "Davin told me." She sat back in her chair. The windows of the war room were black, deep night, well past the 2nd bell. The papers on the table were very organized. She organized things as she finished them. 6 routes, she said. 4 years, the full shape of it. "Yes," he said. 2 more formal proceedings, she said. "The new documentation will take time to process through the channels." "Months," he said, "probably." She was quiet. She picked up the new cup of tea. She held it in both hands. "What happens after?" she said. He sat down. She looked at him. "After the proceedings," she said. "After the routes are fully closed, after the investigation is complete." She looked at the papers on the table. "This is what I have been doing. I am good at this. I know that." A pause. "What do I do after this?" He had thought about this. He had thought about it with the thoroughness he gave to things that mattered. "There will be other investigations," he said. "The network is closed, but the conditions that allowed it will not close overnight. There are pack structures that need review. The relay compromise affected more than one route. Owen will need a ground-level resource for Eastern Territory work." He looked at her. "There is a significant amount of work for someone who sees the way you see." She listened to all of this. "That is not what I asked," she said. He was quiet. "I asked what I do," she said, "not what the role does." He understood. He reached across the table and took her hand. "You stay," he said. "That is what you do." She looked at him. "I am not good at staying," she said. "I have spent most of my life moving to the next thing because the last thing did not hold me." "I know," he said. "This is the first time anything has held me long enough to raise the question," she said. He looked at their joined hands on the war room table, surrounded by the documentation of something that had run on the assumption that certain lives did not hold long enough to matter. He thought about a stone bench in a cold courtyard and a woman who watched bare trees until their buds came in. He thought about a gathering field and a rope and a horizon that had been looked at steadily until the looking itself became something. "I cannot promise you that the council will be uncomplicated," he said, "or that Pharaoh will become a different person, or that the category you were placed in at 24 will not follow you into rooms where you are trying to do something specific. I cannot promise any of that." "I know," she said. "I can tell you," he said, that the room is different when you are in it, and that I have noticed this room and every courtyard and every corridor. She looked at him with those still water eyes. I noticed the footsteps, she said. He blinked. The first night I was in the holding house, she said, in the corridor outside my room. I heard your footsteps and I knew them, though I had not been given a reason to know them yet. A pause. I noticed the bench, I noticed you sitting down on it. I have been noticing you since the stone bench. She looked at the table. It is a very inconvenient quality in a practical person. He wanted to say something, several things, he chose one. We are not convenient people, he said. Something that was fully a smile this time, not adjacent to one, not almost one, but a real one, crossed her face. No, she said, we are not. She drank the tea. He sat with her while she did. The war room was warm and the papers were organized, and outside the windows the city made its steady nighttime sounds. She finished the tea, she stood, he stood. They walked out of the war room together and through the corridor, and past the door of the room where she had first stayed, which was not where she stayed anymore, and through the part of the capital that was theirs now, not by declaration alone, but by the accumulated weight of evenings and courtyard benches and cut jaws and midnight cups of tea, and the particular kind of knowing that only comes from being present with someone day after day without performing anything. She had been sold for less than the price of a good winter coat. She had been listed on a piece of paper a year before she knew she was for sale. She had been classified as without fruit in the language of a pack that measured worth by the narrowest possible standard. She had carried a wounded stranger out of the cold and sent fire across the night sky, and crossed open country with a document in her coat, and sat on a stone bench and told an alpha king that an apology was not action, and found 6 routes through a network that had depended on no one looking too carefully. She had looked carefully. She had always looked carefully. It was, she thought, the most consistent thing about her. She would keep looking. There was always more to find.